Olivia Sibley, and I'm a senior at Trinity Episcopal School. Next fall, I will be attending the University of Georgia. 2.5 years ago, my mom presented me with an option. Either I go to a summer school college class program, or I go on an outward bound trip like she had. As I believe almost every teenager would do, I chose the non-school option. I promptly forgot about the choice that I had made and went on with my life until the weather was warming up and I was thinking about my summer plans. To give a little background, I was signed up for a 22-day alpine backpacking trip in the Colorado Rockies, while my mother had been on a 6-day trip in the Boundary Waters. As you can imagine, there's a bit of a difference in these trips, and I ended up doing things neither my mother nor I was ready for. I was signed up without friends or anyone I knew, not even anyone from my state. At all the summer camps I had been to in the past, I never went without my sister or my best friend. This would be the first time I would be in a new situation and completely alone. To add to my unfamiliarity with the situation, I knew nothing about backpacking, other than a very short and very pampered trip in Yosemite 5 years prior. In the weeks leading up to my trip, I filled my lack of knowledge with my own narrative about what would occur. I would starve to death. I wouldn't be able to keep up with everybody else. I would make no friends and be alone for 22 days. I would fall off the mountain and die. I regretted my decision immensely, and despite how much I was looking forward to a break from school, wished that I had chosen college classes over this. I failed to see the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that I was very blessed to be presented with. My parents, to their credit, did not let me back out of the trip, and I'm very grateful that they didn't. When I arrived in Colorado, I began crying. For the first 3 days in which we did not hike, every time we weren't doing an activity and the silence started to creep in, I would start crying. I was cold and hungry, and I missed my warm bed and weighted blanket that were waiting for me right at home. The narrative still running through my head was sure that I would make it home before we had to do any actual hiking. I was very wrong. After 3 very teary days, I packed all the clothes, food, and toiletries that I would use for the next 3 weeks into my backpack and walked into that country with 12 other strangers. The difference in the backcountry was that it was always silent. I was alone with my own narrative for the 12 hours of the day that we would hike. Sure, there were side conversations, but when 70 pounds is on your back, words are a little hard to come by. So for one of the first times in my life, I didn't talk all day. I both physically and emotionally couldn't. Physically, I was exhausted, and emotionally, I was so shocked that I was there. When I was surrounded with silence that I could not fill with my own narrative anymore, I thought about God. While I had always known God, always believed in God, I never thought I had a relationship with God necessarily. God was a distant, more adult topic than I was ready for at my ripe age of 16. In the long days I spent alone with God, I learned a lot about silence. When I was a little kid, the punishment I hated most was timeout because it forced me to be silent and reflect on what I had done. The timeout style of reflection that I did in the first week of the backcountry, the timeout style of reflection was what I was doing as we trudged up the field of rocks day after day. I realized that my initial reaction, the way that I filled the silence, was immature. I was consumed with how I would be alone, or how it would be hard, and failed to realize that God would be with me every step of the way. I had gotten the chance, the blessing, to be surrounded by God's glory and nature for several weeks, and I had considered it a hindrance because I would be missing out on some summer. I feel like the silence of the first week in the backcountry was my time out for being so consumed with missing my material comforts of home. In the Gospel, Peter, similarly, when put into a situation where he was surrounded with silence and the unknown, fell back on his materialistic views. He was witnessing the greatness of God's glory firsthand, seeing prophets that were long dead speaking with his rabbi, and his response was to offer them something that went directly against one of the main pillars of the Gospel. He offered to build the prophets temporary earthly houses while they are living eternally in heaven with God. We can't necessarily blame him. Peter is all of us. When confronted with silence, we are all guilty for reaching for our material comforts. No one likes not being in the know, but with God we need to accept that we will never really know. This acceptance took a lot of weight off my shoulders. The only thing we really know is that we know nothing. And in my moment of silence, I needed to accept that I knew nothing, but I was with God. I found that trusting God in those moments where we realize how little we know is the only way to lead my life without being consumed with anxiety. Being able to reflect in the silence, find God's presence when we are uncomfortable is hard. 22 days without my phone, talking substantially less than I normally would, and continually being shown again the wonders of God's glory as I peaked mountain after mountain, brought me closer to God and taught me that in the moments of silence, in the pauses of uncertainty in life, I need to seek comfort in God's presence. I learned over those 22 days that doing so will only bring you closer to God. The word of the Lord.